I eat an astronomical amount of food. I think for someone of my size, it's always quite interesting watching people's faces when they don't know me or they've never been out for a meal with me. And they're always like, she's not going to eat all that. Strap in. You are about to see something incredible.
Hold my beers.
Hold my beers. It's like, can I have whatever's left on your plate? There won't be anything left, just for absolute clarity.
Do you lick the plate sometimes if it's really good?
No, I'm not an animal, Greg.
Oh, right, that's just me.
Bread and butter, mop it up. This is The Method, a podcast from Thriver about what health looks like in the real world.
I'm Dr. Greg Potter. I'm a scientist and health and performance consultant.
And I'm Charlie Edmondson. Whilst I love sport, I'm definitely not a science expert. I've got a regular job, and I'm here to remind Greg of what life's actually like when you're not a nerd.
How dare you call me a nerd? So on this show, we'll work out some sustainable changes to your routine that will actually make a difference to your health. And to do that, we've got a simple 3-step method. First, we bring in an expert to unpack the science behind one key health question. Second, we provide some tips and habits you can try right now. And then finally, we put the practice to the test.
Each week, we're going to hear from those who have tried and tested our recommendations to help turn a so-called ideal lifestyle into something that actually works for you.
Charlie?
Yes.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you? Well, no, I'm tired, but I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. You are still preparing for your upcoming marathon, and that means that relative to a lot of people, you're going to need a bit more food.
I mean, when you're doing 22-mile runs on a weekend, it takes, quite a lot out of you, so...
But the great news is that you need to eat a lot of crumpets to replete your glycogen stores.
I tell you what, the hunger that hits... I wake up at 4 a.m, starving, so I've actually had to start putting little snacks next to my bed. When I wake up, I don't have to wake the dogs up going downstairs and rustling around, so now I just have little snacks next to my bed, so at 4 a.m. I can eat and then go back to sleep for a few hours now.
What are your midnight snacks of choice?
I quite like a chocolate covered rice cake. Saurine. But I have to limit myself on that one because I can eat a whole loaf of that.
That's one of the tastes of childhood.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Do you toast it and put butter on it?
So this is what's weird. I had never toasted saurine before until I was at someone that I used to do triathlon with. And she was like, do you want some saurine? And I was like, yeah. And she put it in the toaster. I was like, this is a revelation.
Yep.
It's unreal.
Yeah.
It makes it like extra gooey.
It's so chewy, slightly caramelized, then you get the aroma as well. Stuff of dreams. The good news, regardless, is that you get to crank up saurine intake.
Food, any intake.
Yeah.
3 breakfasts is preferable.
3? Was that 3 before midday?
Yeah.
I'm a double breakfast man, but triple breakfast.
Yeah. 1 before I leave the house, 1 when I get to work after I've been to the gym, and then 1 mid-morning, about 10:30.
Cool, that's strong. That brings up the subject of personalised nutrition, which is the topic of today's episode.
So today we're joined by Lucia Aronica.
Lucia Aronica.
Lucia Aronica.
Take that again.
Today we're joined by
Lucia.
Today we're joined by Lucia Aronica. Also, I'll say it in a Manc accent, not an Italian accent, because I don't want to offend her, do I? Lucia is a lecturer at Stanford who specialises in epigenetics, which obviously I had no idea what that meant, so I had to Google it. And it is about how the way we live and eat can influence how our genes behave.
Naughty genes.
Naughty genes. For nearly 20 years, she's been researching how food shapes ageing and long-term health. And alongside her research, she also teaches and helps design Stanford's courses on nutrition and longevity. I'm intrigued whether today's guest is going to tell me why at the age of 35 I'm still getting teenage acne because of my diet. I'm intrigued. There's the whole thing in Chinese medicine, I know it can be a bit controversial, about your gut health and how that relates to illnesses. I've also got psoriasis. This is like a session with my GP now, isn't it?
Just a bit, yeah.
And they always say that stems from too much heat in your gut. I've got a hot gut apparently. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Are you talking about the six-pack?
No, I'm talking about internal heat. That's the whole theory. When I went, they were just like, a lot of internal heat. And I was like, okay, well, how do I get rid of this internal heat?
I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that there's a strong relationship between what you eat and the health of your skin. And all sorts of dietary constituents can contribute to skin health and also, therefore, poor skin health. For example, people with very poor blood sugar control and insulin resistance tend to have more spots than people with better control. But going by your recent Thrive
I was
blood
going to say,
test,
mine were
it's unlikely to be the case for you.
green, green, green. That was a picture of health. Thriver didn't do a test for how hot my gut was.
No. Oh, we should pitch that to them.
Guys,
Fish.
we've got an idea. We think it's really going to fly.
The hot gut test.
That might be question number 1. Tell me about hot guts.
That's a strong opener. Yeah.
Right, shall we bring in Lucia?
Let's bring in Lucia.
I don't think we should say that to her. Thank you, Lucia, for joining us today. So I just wanted to start off with the basics. So if you could just explain to us what actually is personalised nutrition, why does it matter, and what factors shape it?
Yeah, so personalized nutrition means personalizing your nutrition recommendations based on individual physiology. Things like genetics, vitamin levels, even microbiome. Of course, some of these tests we can only currently measure in research labs. The microbiome testing available today is not yet capable of really providing personalized information, in my opinion. But yeah, the concept overall is using testing, molecular testing, to personalize nutrition recommendations.
And when you talk about microbiome, could you just explain what that is before we get into the more science side of things?
Yeah, there are more bacteria in our body than human cells. So we have bacteria everywhere. And the gut microbiome in particular are fundamental to our health. Specifically, they contribute to our immune defenses, the way we break down some nutrients in the food, even some food allergies, how we tolerate, for example, fiber. You may think, okay, is fiber good or bad? It depends. Based on your microbiome, actually, when you increase fiber, you may increase inflammation. So there are, for example, studies that have shown that people with low microbiome diversity, so fewer bacteria species, actually they respond to an increased fiber intake with increased inflammatory markers. Whereas people with more bacteria, so higher microbiome diversity, when they eat more fiber, well, they experience low inflammation. I'm telling you this just to give you an example of personalized nutrition right here. Now, the specific study I'm talking about was a study published a few years ago at Stanford by my colleague Justin Sonnenberg and Christopher Gardner. And they used, very sophisticated microbiome testing that is not available to everyday people listening today. But one day we may be able to tell people, maybe increasing fiber may not be the best thing for you right now.
I think that's a terrific example because the typical guidance is for people to increase their fiber intakes. And if we can truly personalize effectively, then there'll be instances in which the recommendations that we give someone might run counter to the more generic ones that we would give others. I know you weren't an author on the original article, Lucia, but you've helped with some analyses of the DIETFITS study, which is certainly among the best known personalized nutrition studies. The study randomized people who were overweight or obese at baseline into two groups, a low carb group or a low fat group. and followed those people for 12 months. What were the main findings of that study?
Yeah, so I was leading the epigenetic analysis of the Stanford DIETFITS study. So I was really looking at how the different diets have modified gene expression. And then I've led the analysis of the women versus men differences in the study. So anyway, zooming back, it included 609 healthy but overweight men and women randomized to either a healthy low carb or a healthy low fat diet. I'm emphasizing healthy here because both diets were really based on whole foods. So no refined carbohydrates and sugar. I'm talking no pasta, no bread, no pizza, no everything. So both diets were actually lower carb compared to the standard American diet. Because come on, if you cut or refine carbohydrates and sugar, you are reducing carbohydrates.
Lucia, I was going to say, you're Italian. They couldn't have run the study in Italy, cutting pasta and pizza. Absolutely not.
It would have been very difficult. But
Travesty.
But I think it's not impossible. We can talk about my own lifestyle, and I just give you a spoiler alert right now. I quit pasta, pizza, and bread almost 20 years ago now.
And you lost your citizenship.
I almost. Don't tell this. I think Italy is still thinking about it. They're being generous with me right now. I am representing Italy abroad, and I'm working on science for the benefit of all Italians. So both diets were lower carb. I think this is very important. The main outcome was weight loss, and overall, both groups improved lipids across the board, sugar, and there was no difference in weight loss predicted by genetics. So specifically, we looked at 3 genes that supposedly were predisposing people, PPAR gamma, ADRB2, and fat binding protein 2. Well, at the end, we didn't find that these genes made any difference in predicting weight loss on either diet. And I think genetic variation, it's more useful at predicting and personalizing recommendations for micronutrients, like vitamins, for example, vitamin D or folate, B9, than macronutrients, like in this case, carbs and fats.
That was a lot there, but a few key things to remember. There is actually a bit of a misconception that people are just genetically wired to either lose weight or gain weight. But actually, the Stanford DIETFITS study suggests our genes don't play as big a role as we think. Where genes do actually seem to matter is at the micro level. Things like your vitamin levels, your gut bacteria, fibre, your genes affect how much of them you actually produce. That's why testing micronutrients can be really useful. It gives us a much better idea of what's going on in our bodies and what we might actually need more or less of. Whereas with macros like carbs and fats, there's a lot more factors at play. For example, your own decision making and your habits.
For micronutrients, things are in a way more simple, right? If you have an enzyme that you have a genetic variant that is really significantly decreasing your ability to activate vitamin B9 or folate, right? You're very likely to need more vitamin B9. It's a strong determinant. Whereas for macronutrients, there are so many other factors that influence your response that the genetic component becomes really meaningless. For example, again, your baseline weight, your insulin resistance, your lipids, right? Look, you have great genes for metabolizing carbohydrates. So telling you now that you can indulge in carbohydrates will be a very big mistake. I don't care whether you were born with great genes. If you go eat pizza, pasta, and bread all your life, right? Let's say now you're in your 50s and you have abused of refined carbohydrate and sugar for all your lives, well, you're likely type 2 diabetes now. So this is just a point to tell you the macronutrient component is really heavily affected by other markers and other genetic variants.
That's an interesting perspective. And you mentioned that biological sex might be a factor here. Genes, of course, determine whether someone is male or female at birth too. What did you find in that subsequent analysis?
Yeah, well, you mentioned genetics, but men and women are genetically different. But then this also results in difference in hormones and fat distributions. For example, men have more visceral fat, the fat that accumulates in the central part of our body around our organs and belly fat. And these also affect the response to low carbohydrate versus low fat. So what we found is that men lost more weight and more fat on a low carbohydrate diet. We think that here there is also a behavioral component because the women didn't stick to the low carb diet as well. Traditionally, women have been let's say, brainwashed that fat makes you fat, right? There is a lot of gender marketing going on where, for example, if you go to a supermarket, any low-fat yogurt is pink for a reason. They are marketing women. And so women have been indoctrinated to think that fat makes you fat, so they are reluctant to increase dietary fat. And so maybe, for the man it was easier to stick to a low-carb diet because they were just increasing the fat and finding it easier, whereas for women this might be more difficult. So again, this is another example of personalization that even if you just look at a subgroup of people, in this case, men versus women, well, the results look different.
And as we approach the end of this segment, Lucia, you mentioned that adherence is a big factor in nutrition research. That always comes up, in particular with more extreme dietary interventions like studies of the ketogenic diet, where over time people's carbohydrate intake tends to creep up a little bit, and that raises limitations of studies. So on that note, what are some important limitations of personalized nutrition studies that our listeners should be aware of?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. We could have an episode only on this.
I know. We could probably have many episodes on this.
Yeah. In general, is the study design. Sometimes primary outcomes are cherry-picked to demonstrate that that diet or that intervention is superior. So the point is you need to look at the study design, the population, the primary outcome, why they chose that outcome. And then, of course, study length, right? How long was the study? Is this enough if it's a 2-month study, is this enough to tell you something long-term? There are so many variables. So I always encourage people, never just look at the title, not even the abstract. Always ask yourself, who are the people involved? What is the outcome that is being investigated? And what are the methods and potential confounding factors?
So if we look at that literature at large, then would you say that overall it's been shown that personalized nutrition interventions are meaningfully better than relatively healthy generic diets, or is the difference really quite small?
Okay, I would say when we talk about personalized nutrition, rather than thinking in is this good or bad, we need to think this. Personalized nutrition is absolutely important, just because, as I told you, any food can be good or bad for you depending on your individual physiology. We talked about fiber before, but I can really name any food, like spinach is a great food, but if you have kidney stones, it's full of oxalates, and you probably don't want to overindulge in spinach. Eggs are great for most people, but if you are one of those 25% of people who have cholesterol hyperresponders, and you have high cholesterol, Well, maybe not more than 2 eggs a day. So personalized nutrition I think, is the way to go. But we don't have programs or companies or products that can systematize this right now in a way that, they test your genetics and give you personalized recommendation. I think we are not there yet, but I do want to think, if you working on personalizing your diet, either alone or with a health professional, is something worthwhile.
This is the point where you're probably sat there thinking, what on earth is going on, Charlie? I don't have access to a lab, DNA testing, I'm not Dexter. Well, just wait. We're going to figure this out together, trust me. Trust me, we will get there. Before we move on, let's just have a quick recap on what we've covered so far. Micronutrients, those are worth testing and personalising. But with macronutrients, it's often more about looking at your habits first. And remember, even really strong research is based on certain assumptions, so it's always worth asking how much of it actually applies to you. Before you go and change your whole lifestyle, ask yourself, were the people in the study similar to me? Did they live in a similar environment? Did they have a similar diet to me? It's probably worth considering that before you go and implement a whole load of changes. Are we all clear? Okay, with that in mind, let's move into the practical side of things. What we can actually do with all of this information. We're going to keep it really simple to start with. Before we get into personalisation specifically, I was wondering whether you could give us some generic guidance that you think applies to all of us who want to eat healthily.
Oh, thank you for this question, because this is also very important. While everyone is over-obsessed on personalization, I think, is the 20% of the equation. The 80% of the equation of a healthy diet are those universal principles you are asking me about right now, which is a diet that is based on whole, unprocessed foods. Minimize refined carbohydrates and sugar. This is 80%. Honestly, if everyone would do this, we would defeat chronic disease. And we wouldn't even be talking so much about, which diet, vegan, omnivore, keto, low fat. This is universal, come on. And then, I think the 20%, the personalization, can be more important for some individuals, right? If I tell you, dairy is great, but you are lactose intolerant, well, maybe it's not that great for you. Vegan or vegetarians that might need, for example, to prioritize some omega-3 fatty acid sources because they can get enough from plants or protein, or again, then we have the personalization. But if we just eat like all unprocessed food, we'll do the 80% that really matters for our health.
So once someone's obviously got those broad healthy eating habits in place, so 80% whole foods, where does personalisation actually start to matter then? So for example, if someone wanted to lose body fat.
Yeah, okay. Specifically for body weight, this is tricky because, for example, I can tell you, in general, low carb from just a biochemical point of view makes more sense for people who are insulin resistant, just because you are basically your carbohydrate and therefore glucose load. And if you have a problem with glucose metabolism, this is physiologically, I think, better. However, we need to take into account also your food preferences, because as we said, the best diet is the one that you can stick to. So we need to collect more data for personalization. So it's your baseline weight, is your insulin resistance, are your food preferences. But overall, I would say try first to focus on whole foods and really eliminate refined carbs and sugar and see how it goes. And then you can tweak based on your dietary preferences and vitamin levels and insulin resistant levels. If you have like high insulin resistance, I would focus on those vegetables that tend to grow above ground, like green leafy vegetables, zucchini, squash, tomatoes, avocado. So these things tend to have lower glycemic load. So we are talking lower carbohydrate content compared to roots or vegetables that grow below ground, like potatoes, like turnips.
Just there, you've mentioned a couple of times there about being insulin resistant. Would anyone know that they are insulin resistant without testing? Like, is there a symptom or a sign?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. First of all, I want to encourage people to test their insulin level, because insulin is the hormone that keeps your blood sugar in check. When you eat a high carb meal, you produce insulin, which lowers your blood sugar until it doesn't do it anymore if you abuse of this beautiful control system and eat too much sugar and carbohydrates for all your life. So here's what happens. You might have normal glucose because your insulin is sky high. It's working hard to lower the glucose because you are eating a lot of carbs and sugar, until after 10 or 20 years, the system is broken. And you go and check your insulin and you see that your insulin is high, but now also the blood sugar is high because your body became insulin resistant. It's not responding anymore to that high insulin. So please, always test your insulin, because your glucose is meaningful only when it's too late, when you are already pre-diabetic and diabetic. So sorry, I'm very passionate about this, but it's like insane.
I'm glad that you mentioned insulin, Lucia. The tricky thing with assessing insulin resistance is that the gold standard assessment, which is abbreviated to HOMA-IR, isn't practical. Being pragmatic for listeners, a good alternative for most of us is to look at the ratio between triglycerides and HDL in the blood. And for people who are interested, a ratio of 2 or lower is generally considered optimal, whereas a higher ratio suggests insulin resistance. Another option is to look at the triglyceride to glucose index, which is also a proxy of insulin resistance and also uses two widely available common markers, fasting blood glucose and triglycerides. I'm also glad that you spoke about people's preferences, and that brings up many non-nutritional factors that we need to consider, like whether someone has a history of disordered eating, what the person's food environment is like. So I wondered if you can comment on the importance of the need to consider the food environment and a person's eating behaviors.
Yeah, I think behavioral change is the $1 million question that nobody has solved right now, because how can we make people stick to the plan? And I will give you an Italian perspective on this.
Love an Italian perspective.
So my philosophy is the following. We tend to think that pleasure is the opposite of health, right? Is indulgence in bad food. But I think pleasure is the compass to find health. And let me explain. You can't be consistent with something you hate, but you can and will be consistent with something you truly enjoy. And that's why, for example, in Italy, we don't see eating at the table with family and cooking food as a prescription. We focus on food that actually tastes like amazing. And we naturally want to repeat that behavior over and over. I think pleasure is really something that we need to rediscover. Now, there are two problems with this philosophy. On one hand, pleasure is a good thing. It's an evolutionary mechanism. However, the processed food industry has hijacked this natural system, creating food that stimulates our pleasure center in ways that natural food can't. So The bad part is not the pleasure itself, is that there are now authentic pleasure and what I call Trojan horse pleasures. So these are artificial pleasures like, food, processed food, or social media. So this is, I think, why it's so complex, because we lost that natural mechanism that make us want to stick long term to a habit that make us healthy. But it's pleasure. And you first, if you have an addiction for processed food, which is the bad pleasure, right? You first cure that. But then you need to replace that with a good addiction, right? If we want to white knuckle our way to health by embracing protocols we hate, we are not going anywhere. So it's a process that takes time, and pleasurable eating can mean different things for different people, but it's absolutely important that you loved your food.
And you're speaking to an Italophile, someone who spent a lot of time in Sardinia in particular, and something that I love about the culture
so
there.
You know.
Yeah, I do, but it's a lovely environment in which to eat, because people sit down to share their food together, have a nice time, and how they think about food and relate to food influences your own behaviors and so on. But I realized that we need to move into the experience section, and we've got lots of good questions from listeners this week, so I'll pass over to Charlie.
Yeah, so now we want to put some of this information to use. So we're going to reflect on a couple of listener questions. I think the first one is a voice note.
I'd like to know when DNA will be used to tell us what nutrition we need.
That's cool. Well, we talk about it during the podcast, right? So we actually can use certain genetic variants to help you understand whether you need, for example, more of certain vitamins like vitamin D, like B6, or even omega-3 fatty acids. However, that testing needs always to be combined with other lab testing. So for example, for B9, you will test both your DNA and your vitamin B9 levels. And only if, I see low levels of B9 plus a genetic predisposition, then I will prescribe you a vitamin B9 supplements. So yes, we can do it right now, but it needs to be done holistically, looking at other labs and your lifestyle.
So the next is an email from Alex, who is based in London, and they have asked, is it advisable to have 2, max 3 meals a day to avoid insulin spikes, or this may block the metabolism, which means small frequent meals are more advisable to boost metabolism?
I love this question because the answer is it depends. It always depends. First of all, just the premises, right? To have that having more meals spikes your insulin. Not necessarily. For example, a piece of butter doesn't spike your insulin at all. It depends on what you eat. Your insulin will be spiked by carbohydrates primarily, very little by protein, and not at all by fat. So just the premise, it depends on what you eat, how much you eat. And then, I would say this. We know that traditionally, for example, bodybuilders who really want to get lean and preserve muscle mass, they tend to eat like very small meals very frequently, and they have great results. Believe me, they are not going to spike their insulin at all for 2 reasons. First of all, they really pay attention to what they eat. Plus, they have a lot of muscle, which works as a sugar sponge. So which means even if they eat more sugar, their muscle are so hungry for that sugar that their blood glucose doesn't raise and their insulin doesn't spike, right? So again, it's depending on the outcome you want to seek. If you are, on the other hand, you are saying, no, everything I care about is to build my resilience, to make my body more resistant to hunger, to manage, to trigger autophagy, which is a cell recycling. And then you may say, I will skip a meal and I will take advantage of that. I think, again, it depends on what you eat and what you want to achieve, and of course, of your initial body weight and lifestyle, because this is another scenario. If you have a food addiction, it's a very bad idea to eat every 2-3 hours, because you are probably going to make poor dietary choices multiple times a day. This is why fasting works so beautifully for people who are making bad decisions every time they eat. So why would you eat 2-3 times a day? Or, it depends. But it's a beautiful question. There's no universal answer. Yeah.
I definitely won't be fasting. I do eat every 2 hours, I think. I'm in the midst of marathon training though, so that's why, because otherwise I get very hungry.
That's good.
So then we have a question from James in London, who has said, does keto actually destroy your microbiome, and are meal replacement drinks actually healthy?
I love these questions. Again, keto is everything and nothing.
There's not one diet.
What is keto, right?
Yeah.
It's a label. There is a good way and bad way to do any diet. You can be on keto and be vegan and all you eat are plants and a lot of fiber, or you can be carnivore. So if your question is like, would the carnivore diet destroy your microbiome? The reality is that we don't know, because we don't have long-term studies, right? I think, honestly, I would be concerned to completely eliminate vegetables and fiber long term based on the various benefits that we know come from veggies. Are meal replacement drinks actually healthy? Again, it depends. In general, food is always better than any meal replacement. Just the act of chewing and the food metrics and all the nutrients you get from food, no meal replacement can compare. However, there are cases where, for example, my mom, she's 85 years old, and I prescribe her at least one protein shake a day because she struggled with actually chewing protein and eating protein. So she's eating whey protein. But again, that meal replacement doesn't have any other ingredient than, whey. It's whey 100%. The ingredients really matter.
So the next question we have is from Francesca from Surrey, and they have asked, is drinking a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil every day good for you? Oh,
I would say more. I think if I remember correctly, the Predimed study supports 4 tablespoons a day. Yeah, olive oil is the best fat you can have in your diet, especially if it's raw and cold pressed, and if you keep it in a dark bottle, because those polyphenols, the good molecules inside olive oil are really fragile and get destroyed from too much UV exposure. So cold press, extra virgin olive oil in a dark bottle, it's very good for you.
I didn't know this was a thing. But if you are having 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil a day, would you have to cut something else out, or is it?
Yes.
What? Because this seems like a lot.
You would have to compensate, because 4 tablespoons of olive oil, that's roughly 500 calories worth of food. And so if you're a small female and you're consuming 1,400 calories each day to stay in energy balance, then that's more of a third of your daily energy budget.
Again, it depends on your diet, right? I think naturally you will probably eat less and will be more satiated. If you put a tablespoon more of olive oil in your salad, you will naturally eat less of other foods, and probably, even the DIETFITS study, we didn't tell people to cut calories. By increasing their fat intake, they were cutting calories, they were satiated faster.
Yeah, and I completely agree about the form of the olive oil mattering. So I think if you look at the research on olive oil in general, the findings from different studies have shown that the effects on some things like blood pressure and inflammation can be quite modest, but then other analyses that have filtered by the type of olive oil, pardon the pun, and looked at extra virgin olive oil versus refined olive oil, have shown that the extra virgin olive oil can reduce some markers of inflammation. So on that subject, apart from olive oil, which oils are good? There's a lot of discussion about seed oils in particular, and there are some influencers who have thrown them under the bus and said that they're really bad news for everyone. But what does the science actually show about seed oils?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say again that they are bad, right? But I would say that we get seed oils primarily from processed food, which is, of course, processed food is not good. So it's not the seed oil per se, it's that they are overall present in processed food because they are very cheap and companies want to save money. And processed seed oils are so processed that they really lack the bioactive molecules that are good for us, right? They are less nutritionally wise compared to olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil has some polyphenols, especially hydroxytyrosol, which is an epinutrient. Certain nutrients can really signal to our genes to improve our health. And hydroxytyrosol is one of those components. So my point is this: I don't think seed oils are, bad or are per se are going to damage your health. They're very rich in omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6 fatty acids are essential fatty acids. We need them. We need omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. They are both essential and vital. And also the other important caveat is the source, right? Because there are natural sources of omega-6 fatty acid, nuts, seeds, right? Those are great. But the processed seed oil, I think, is not the greatest source. I would much rather eat nuts, other sources of omega-6, nuts, seeds, natural whole foods, right? That's my point.
Yeah. No, and I completely agree with that, because also those foods are so much more than the fatty acids alone, which is what the oils are. And also one more thought for completeness. I would just add that I do think that historically some people have said that omega-6 fatty acids are bad, when if you look at the totality of the evidence, a good example of this is the force analysis, which basically pulls in data from lots of studies and looks at the concentrations of fatty acids in the blood and how those relate to future health outcomes. Then generally speaking, higher levels of the omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic acid, which you get from things like rapeseed oil or cottonseed oil, peanut oil, and so on, tend to relate to better health outcomes. Those people tend to have lower rates of cardiovascular disease. And so I think some people are concerned about the effects of cooking with those types of omega-6 fatty acid rich oils. But actually, if you look at the totality of the evidence, it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. The omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acid ratio is comparing good to good. You need enough of both of them. So don't worry about using seed oils now and then. And with that said, bear in mind the other caveats, like the fact that the whole seeds are better. Extra virgin olive oil is definitely a good source. Final question, Lucia, and thanks so much for your time today. What's one thing that you would like to leave our listeners with to take away from this episode?
Yeah, probably that your DNA and your genes aren't your fate. They are your opportunity. So stop blaming your DNA. Genes are 25% and you are the other 75%. Every meal, every walk outside, every night of sleep is really an opportunity to pick up the epigenetic pencil, because we can rewrite the instructions for our genes with our lifestyle. This is called epigenetics. I've been teaching this framework now for over 10 years at Stanford. And so remember, you hold the pencil to rewrite your genetic instructions every day.
And where can listeners go to find out more about epinutrients and more of your work online?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube and Instagram at Lucia Aronica. I also have a free kitchen science guide on epinutrients at drlucia.com. And if any health professionals are listening, I'm also launching the world's first clinical epinutrition certification at drlucia.com/course. I'd love to have you be part of this movement. And thank you, Charlie and Greg,
Thank you.
so much for having me. This was a joy.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thanks, Lucia.
Thank you.
Crumpet, what are your key takeaways today?
I've actually got notes this week. 25% are your genes, 75% is your decision. So that's actually quite interesting because I think a lot of people do think it's genetics. But yeah, actually 75% is quite a lot, isn't it, that you can influence. I'm also intrigued by this oil conversation. I'm going to go away and do some research on that because I'm not really feeling going and taking 4 tablespoons of olive oil.
That is one that we should revisit because there is so much confusion about that. And not everyone is going to be able to afford using extra virgin olive oil as their sole source of cooking oil. And if you are going to fry food, which pretty much everyone is now and then, and you can't afford to use extra virgin olive oil all the time, then periodically using something like rapeseed oil is absolutely fine. And then in terms of some of the other takeaways I have, first and most importantly, I think Lucia needs to be careful if she wants to retain her Italian passport. But I hope she does. Italy should be proud to have her.
No
She's
pasta,
lovely.
pizza. I mean, bread, it's fine, I don't eat that. I wonder whether crumpets falls into that. Do you think?
I don't think they have crumpets in Italy.
What? No crumpets?
Nah.
Oh.
Anyway, getting back to my takeaways,
Sorry.
it makes sense to start with generic guidance, and that is going to get you the lion's share of your results. So focusing on the fundamentals, like basing your diet primarily on minimally processed foods and achieving an energy balance that makes sense for you. If you're trying to lose weight, that means consuming fewer calories than you expend. If you're trying to gain weight, then vice versa. Another point that I would have loved to have discussed more is just that in these studies, they focused on things like genes and hormones, but lots of things do matter. And I think we'll see this in personalized nutrition research as it progresses. Things like your sleep recently, your access to foods, which obviously depends on your food environment, your proximity to fast food restaurants, which we know quite strongly relates to eating behavior, and food choices that people make and therefore their health outcomes too. And on that note, I think that various technological developments will be instrumental going forward. As we integrate more technology into the process of personalization, I think we'll get better results. So a good example of this is using GPS. So if you think about someone who's hungry at lunchtime and they're at the office and they're trying to navigate that complex environment, they're trying to find something healthy that is affordable for them in the moment. That's an opportunity when we could intervene to help someone identify a healthy option for them. That is doable with the appropriate technology. I've spent a lot of time in Asia, and in much of Asia, you can get a brilliant vegetable-rich meal for about €2 or £2. And we just don't have that in England.
Well, that's what a teaspoon of olive oil is going to cost me.
I reckon you can get a tablespoon for that.
I'll be drinking that by breakfast.
Delicious start to the day.
You've been listening to The Method, Health in the Real World, a podcast brought to you by Thriver.
If you don't know about Thriver, it's a health tracking platform that helps you see exactly where your health is heading, what to work on, and how to do so. They use painless at-home blood testing to show you what's going on in your body. Your results are analysed by accredited labs, and based on the tests, you get personalised guidance from real doctors. People use Thriver like a compass, testing every few months to help steer their health to where they'd like it to be. It's a great tool to start feeling more empowered about your health and to get information you need to make progress, even when life is a bit hectic.
Thriver also has some great content out there that can help you get to grips with complex health questions, exactly like what we try to do on this podcast. And all of that is free to access. So if you want to learn more, just head over to thriver.co. That's thriver.co.
And of course, if you love the show, subscribe. Why would you not do that? It takes just a few seconds and you won't regret it.
You can also leave us a review or write to us by email to themethod@thriver.co. Or if you're like me and Greg and you'd rather send things over by voice note, then we'd love to hear from you.
Special thanks to Thriver team and to Lower Street for helping us bring the show to life. Content direction by Rich Cousins, Hamish Grierson, Tamar Loach, Vishal Shah, and Katie Yockey. Production from Lise Lavati with the help of Sam Dattapoulin and Daria Lawson. And sound design by Alex Rose.
We're your hosts, Charlie Edmondson and Greg Potter, and we'll see you next time. When I flew into Sardinia, amazing, just fresh fruit all in the airport, massive tubs of it for like was it euros over there? Is it euros?
It is euros.
Is it euros? Cut that out, Liz. I sound really thick when I say that.
Charlie.
Is it? Cut that out. Don't even put that in the bloopers.
That has to stay in.
Don't.
We hate censorship.
I think that's going in the bloopers, Charlie. I have no choice. As a European, it has to go. I'm so sorry.